Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is Miss Gooding, and today I want to talk about the Battle of Little Bighorn. This battle is a small battle, although very significant, in the larger context of the Sioux Indian Wars. And you will also hear of this battle also called by the names of the Battle of Greasy Grass or Custer's Last Stand. This battle started on June 25th, but the majority of it took place on June 26th of 1876. To orient ourselves a little bit, here is the state of Montana. The Black Hills are in this general area, and here is Little Bighorn. So it's in the southeastern part of Montana. My family and I were lucky enough to travel to this area, and we did stop by Last Stand Hill, which is where this battle took place. And this is one picture looking out over the country. Here's my son and I. Before we get into the details of this battle, I do want to talk a little bit about who Custer was and some of the basics of this battle. So, like I said before, this battle took place in southern Montana, in the Black Hills, and the purpose of this battle was to subdue a village of defiant Indians. And of course, that would be the perspective of the United States and the government at the time. But a little bit about General Custer, who was the one who he and his men perished during this battle. Custer ended up going to West Point. He was the last in his class at West Point. But after graduating from West Point, he was court-martialed for not stopping a fight in between two cadets. Okay, so that gives you kind of an indication of what type of leader he was. Because they needed military leaders so badly during the Civil War, they allowed him to command a unit, regardless of he being court-martialed. And so he served fairly successfully during the Civil War, but yet he was court-martialed again during the Civil War for leaving his post without permission. And he actually went on leave without pay for a year during that time. But he returned to duty when a lot of trouble with the Native Americans broke out in the West. And this was obviously in 1876, around that time, and so it was after the Civil War. But they reinstated him, and he became general. So he had quite a torrid history as a military leader, and you will see during this battle, you know, the guy dies in the Battle of Little Bighorn, but and basically so do all of his men, and so he was a very controversial figure, to say the least. Here is an image of Sitting Bull, and Sitting Bull was the chief of the Sioux Indian tribe. And I will talk a lot more about him and, you know, what happens, but he was there at the Battle of Little Bighorn. And it's actually kind of a sad story what happens to him, but I will get to that in a little bit. So I want to orient you guys. You know that the battle itself takes place in the southern part of Montana, but here is now a close-up of kind of what the battlefield looked like. So you have this river, and this is the Little Bighorn River. Okay, there is this is uphill. Native Americans, these Native Americans at the time were, the history behind this is President Grant he was abiding by the Laramie Treaty, which basically gave Native American tribes such as the Lakota and the Sioux and the Cheyenne much of Montana, Wyoming, and South Dakota. Because as you know, American settlers were moving west, and so Native American tribes were continuously being pushed west. So the Treaty of Laramie guaranteed them these areas. However, gold was found in the Black Hills, and so whites started going there in droves, hoping to strike it rich, which angered the Native American tribes that were promised this land. And this area was very, very sacred to Native Americans. And so basically, the US government looked at Custer and said, hey, Custer, we need you to help us with the quote unquote Indian problem. And so Custer, ended up getting together, with his troop, and they led him to this area. And because Grant had been getting so much pressure to fight back against the Indians to make sure that whites were safe as they were looking for gold. Grant did not really like Custer, you guys. Grant knew that Custer was very, very critical of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. But Grant was talked into allowing Custer to lead this battle regardless of Custer's reputation. So Custer goes to the Greasy Grass Hill area, and in the Greasy Grass, it's called that by the Native Americans. But the Native Americans at this time, because they were getting pressured by the U.S. government to leave the area, were rebelling. And so they were traveling around this area, and they were trying to escape these units that were basically chasing them. And so there was a group of Native Americans that included the Lakota, the Cheyenne, and the Sioux predominantly. I think at the Arapaho as well, that landed, or they decided to kind of join forces, and they stayed here at the Little Bighorn River. Okay. Well, Custer goes there, and the morning of, or maybe sometime during the day of the 25th, he looks over this river and over the hills, and he sees how many Native Americans there are. And regardless, he decides to attack. So this is an actual picture of looking down. And so the Native Americans would have been along this river. So where these trees are here, you guys, is where the Little Bighorn River is. And again, the Native Americans were basically settling just right over here. The village was across the river. So one thing that historians believe that Custer erred on is he divided his troops into 3 columns. And you can see that in blue is Custer's advance. Okay, there was one group here, there was one group here, and then there was Reno's advance. Okay, the red arrows are the Native American movements. Again, here's the village, the encampment, and the view that I showed you was taken from this area, looking toward this area. So here's north. So north is kind of this way. Here's south, and then west and east. All right, so Custer split his group, okay? And so he and his troops went over this way. And so Custer ended up here on Last Stand Hill. Well, Native Americans saw what was going on, and Crazy Horse and a group of men went around this way, okay? And then another one went this way, and they basically surrounded Custer and Custer's men. And Custer's entire group of men died on Last Stand Hill. Here's a picture of Last Stand Hill. I took this summer. And here are some of the grave markers. You can go ahead and go back if you would like to read this, but Last Stand Hill is basically the remains of about 220 soldiers, scouts, and civilians that are buried around the base of this memorial. So this is another view, but here is George Armstrong Custer's grave marker. He was buried on the hill, and then afterward he was moved to Arlington National Cemetery, but they left his marker there. And here's Marcus Reno's marker. Okay. Anyway, you guys, after the slaughter, okay, so the Lakota, the Cheyenne, and the Sioux Native American groups, they basically slaughtered the U.S. cavalry, okay? And after the battle, because it was so decisive, the United States government cracked down on Native Americans even more so, which forced them to flee. Okay, and so Sitting Bull and his tribe actually fled to Canada. And very, very sadly, eventually, when they relocated to South Dakota, Sitting Bull was accused of something, and that's another story. But basically, he was executed at Wounded Knee. Crazy Horse, who was also a part of Last Stand Hill, did surrender, and he surrendered to the U.S. government in Nebraska.